Welcome to Storytimer, Anne Harmeier. I remember that feeling of driving back to campus after a weekend home. It was such a great feeling. You had visited your family and your hometown and alleviated the homesickness. You had that optimistic feeling of a new week ahead. There's the fresh, clean laundry smell in the car. You've got exciting prospects ahead of you. September 12, 1977, Anne Harmeier was driving back from her small town of Cambridge City, Indiana, to Indiana University in Bloomington. It's not a long drive, but her mother had convinced her not to go on Sunday evening, but to go on Monday morning. She had been having some issues with her car, and her mother felt that driving during the daylight would be safer than driving at night. Anne headed out early in the morning with the intention of making it to her first 10:30 a.m. class at IU. Anne was a junior studying music and drama. She had made this drive many times, and she wasn't worried. She likely had pop music on the radio and was singing along. The weather in Indiana in September is still a bit like summer. It's still very green and warm. The beautiful fall color that's absolutely gorgeous is just not there yet. The temperatures are cool and crisp in the morning and very warm in the afternoon. It's not quite yet time to harvest the corn. That happens a little bit later in the fall, but it's still a very beautiful time of year. It would have been a nice day for Anne to make the drive, but she was having a lot of difficulty with her car. Despite the fact that it was a cool morning, the car was overheating. She stopped several times to put water in the radiator, but just about 2.5 miles north of Martinsville on State Road 37, now I-69, the car broke down. It overheated, and this time she couldn't fix it. She was just stuck there on the side of the road. She debated the idea of getting out and walking toward Martinsville, and then we don't know. When she doesn't make it to the dorm or to her class, her friends and her roommate at college are immediately concerned. When she doesn't call her mom to say she arrived, her mother is, of course, extremely worried. This is not like Anne. Anne and her mother Marjorie had always been extremely close. Anne was an only child. Her father had died when she was just 5. Anne's mother was a teacher, and she raised Anne as a single mom. As soon as school was out for the day, Marjorie and a friend drove toward Bloomington to see if they could find Anne. They found her empty car with the emergency flashers still blinking. Her books, clean laundry, and other things were still in the locked car. Things in the car looked orderly. The area around the car looked ordinary, but there was no sign of Anne. They drove toward Martinsville, thinking they might find her at a local gas station or garage. They called the police, the hospitals, and anywhere else they could think to call, but it was as if Anne had just vanished. I can't imagine what Marjorie must have been feeling that evening. How do you turn around and drive home without your daughter? That must have been a torturous feeling. But they had reached the limit of what could be done there on the side of the road. The Harmeier family belonged to a wonderful community in Cambridge City. Word spread quickly. People mobilized immediately to search for Anne. They printed flyers and started getting them out to television and radio stations. They took them to gas stations, diners, and truck stops. As the days turned to weeks, they funded billboards with a hotline number for tips and a reward for information about Anne. They printed and distributed bright red bumper stickers with the slogan, "Where is Anne?" and the tip line phone number on them. This wasn't a state police phone number. This wasn't Crime Stoppers. This was someone's home phone number in Cambridge City that was being manned by volunteers around the clock. It was truly a grassroots media blitz. People volunteered to drive all over central and southern Indiana, passing out and posting flyers. They raised money for all these efforts with charity events. Their efforts worked in some ways. Anne's case got nationwide attention. Tips did come in, but the tips didn't lead to anything. Weeks went by, but the people of Cambridge City were unrelenting. They got her story in as many newspapers as they could all across the country, but sadly, nothing came of it. Late in the afternoon of October 18th, Lawrence Stanford was harvesting corn when he discovered Anne's remains. She was in a field, only a few rows in from the road, and only 7 miles from her car. She had been strangled with her own shoelace, and her hairbrush had been used to make a garrote. The hairbrush handle was twisted in the shoelace loop around her neck to strangle her. Her hands had been tied with her other shoelace. Her shirt had been pushed up, and her pants and underwear had been pulled down to her ankles. The contents of her purse were scattered around, and her checkbook and ID helped investigators to tentatively determine that this was indeed Anne. An autopsy would show the cause of death was strangulation. Anne had been murdered the morning she went missing. Police theorized she had accepted a ride from someone to get to a phone. The killer could have also offered to drive her to a gas station or garage where she could get the car towed and repaired. Anne was a smart girl and very careful. This person had to have looked extremely safe and trustworthy. Anne wouldn't have just gone with anyone. Either that, or the killer had threatened her with a gun or some other weapon. Anne's death was a devastating blow to everyone who had searched, hoped, and prayed. The community mourned this loss deeply. Anne had been a kind and popular girl with a positive attitude. She had loved performing and enjoyed singing and dancing in a production of South Pacific. She also loved making people laugh. She had even won a local beauty contest. More than all that, she was just one of them. How could this happen to their child? How could a light this bright be gone? Her funeral was attended by hundreds of mourners. She was buried next to her father. The search for Anne was over, but the search for her killer was just beginning. Who could do this? Police looked at known sex offenders and parolees. They questioned motorists at checkpoints, seeking any information, hoping that someone had seen something significant back in September. Perhaps someone saw a car or truck pulled over to seemingly assist Anne. Perhaps someone saw her getting into a vehicle. But there were no tips that led to anything significant, and her case went unsolved. Anne's mother, Marjorie, passed away just a few years later of cancer. Her family said the light had just gone out of her, and she didn't have the will to fight the disease. Volunteers in Cambridge City started teaching automotive repair and self-defense classes for young women and girls in the following years. They didn't want Anne's murder to make young women afraid to get out into the world and go after their dreams. Anne's case is still an open investigation. No one has ever been charged in her murder. One particular suspect was convicted in 1981 of an extremely similar brutal murder. Stephen Timothy Judy is thought to be a suspect in Anne's case. Jeffrey Lynn Hand is also a strong suspect. Murdering women in this way, strangling them and raping them, was something that we know that he did. But there were also many serial rapists and murderers operating in Indiana in the 1970s and 80s. Hopefully, evidence has been preserved in Anne's case, and it can be tested against DNA. I suggest they test it against Jeffrey Lynn Hand's DNA. We know that he murdered in 1972 Pamela Milam, and we know Parabon Nanolabs has a DNA sample of his that could be compared. Rest in peace, Anne Harmeier.